Hi everyone, welcome to the first race of 2024. So this is the second race of the Shonan Cyclocross series. It's the Kaisei race. It's in Kanagawa-ken, just south of Tokyo. I'm racing in the ME4 category, which is the beginner category, and there's about 60 people in this race. It's my 8th race of the season, which started in October. And I've been doing pretty well. I have a few top 10 finishes, I think top 50% in all of them. So just based on the number of races I've done and doing reasonably well in all of them, I've managed to climb my way up to the first position in the rankings. So that means that I get called up to the start line first and get to pick my spot in the front. Since there were so many people in this race, I wanted to make sure I was staying within the top 3 or 5 or so, in the first lap. There's some technical sections where I really didn't want to be behind a bottleneck. The start was a few hundred meters before the finish line. Then there was this tricky feature coming up here on the right it was closed off for the first lead-in, right there off to the right. So it was pretty fast coming around this paved section. You can see the finish line coming up right here. There's the finish line. And this lead-in stretch was pretty fast at over 30 kilometers per hour, but very narrow and windy, so very hard to pass. A little bit of grass here before opening up to another paved area. But this paved area wasn't very long, and again, no room to pass, or very little room to pass, because there's a dismount here to run up the steps. And then at the top of the steps, there's just a little bit of paved area to hop back on the bike. And if you missed that area, it was really hard to get clipped in well here, because it was a little incline that was really hard to maintain balance on. So later in the race, you actually saw people running through that area until they got to the next flat paved section where they could clip in more easily. Coming up on a little bit, there was a little bit of a strange decline. It was paved with sort of some cobbled sections and some smooth grooves. It looked like most people are trying to ride in the groove, although I don't think it really mattered. But what I wanted to try to do is get to the farther end of it, because after reaching the bottom, there's a pretty tight left-hand turn. So I thought that maybe I could preserve some more speed this way and not have to accelerate as hard coming out. With so many turns in a CX course, especially like this that's flat, it's really helpful if you can minimize the amount of acceleration you have to do coming out of each turn. All those efforts just accumulate over the 30 minutes at this category. But then when you get to the higher categories, it's even longer, 45 minutes or an hour. So all of those repeated efforts just really take their toll. So the course was really dry today, and most of it was this thick, dry grass. And in most places it was pretty slow to ride through, but the more we rode over it, the more packed down it would get. And some of those technical turns were a little bit off camber on sort of an incline. So as they got more packed, it was harder and harder to maintain traction. So there were a few slips throughout. I slipped a couple times myself, but it wasn't that much of an issue. I was using mixed terrain tires in both the front and the back. I think a little under 30 psi. It ended up being a pretty good choice for this course, I think. In some of the grassy sections, it may have been faster to have a sort of a less knobby file tread tire, but I'm not sure it would have made that much of a difference. There's also a trade-off with traction, so on some of those off-camber turns I might have been slippier. So this was an interesting section here. It was a long straightaway, and again the grass was very tough to ride through. So on the left-hand side here, it looked like there was a little bit of a groove worn in, and I think a lot of people were trying to follow that same line. I'm not sure how much faster it was than other parts, but it somehow felt easier to pedal through. But you can see that I'm up over 350, 400 watts and still barely 27, 26 kilometers per hour. So despite the effort, it was not especially fast. At this point, I was mostly where I wanted to be. I was in 3rd place. 2nd place was still in sight. I'm not sure I realized how close 4th, 5th, and 6th were behind me, but it seemed like I was still in a decent enough position. Hadn't dug myself into too much of a hole. Although I was starting to notice my heart rate creeping up. 172 beats per minute is manageable for a 30-minute race for me, but this early I was a bit worried that it was just going to creep up and up, which would start to be unsustainable. A couple of barriers coming up here, which aren't too much of a problem usually, but they can be a little tricky when you get tired, and in the back you see someone take a tumble there. That's always tough. Another slow, rough straightaway. Again, a bit of power, but only 25 kilometers per hour, 26. Then we come back into a more packed straightaway here, leading into that the feature that was closed off on the lead-in lap. So you can see here, it's a steep uphill and then a very tight turn coming back down. Wasn't that much trouble to ride it, as long as there was no one around. But if you end up getting stuck behind someone, there's a good chance that you have to hop off the bike and then figure out how to get up and around and hop back on the way down. So here we're barely into the 2nd lap and my heart rate is up at 176. Definitely not going to be able to keep that up without a little bit of rest. Guy in front of me just managed to have a smoother clip in. I struggled a bit on a couple of the laps on that slow uphill remount. It was just hard to get my feet back in and get pedaling. I might still have been remembering that finish from last month. I thought I was clipped in and took a big spill before the finish line. Just up ahead you can see someone slip out there. Again, one of these off-camber turns with the grass matted down a little bit, where it was just hard to maintain traction. I don't think I was getting quite as wide on that turn as I had intended. Again, with trying to conserve energy and minimize the acceleration, I really try to take as much of the course as I can coming around those turns. Start on one side towards the tape and then sort of go through the apex of the turn and come all the way out to the other side. So we're approaching that long straightaway again here after the U-turn. I lost a couple of spots, down to 5th place now. Ideally, I wanted to use this straightaway to try to make some passes and move up a couple spots, but with my heart rate a little elevated and this section just being pretty slow for how much power I had to put out, I just sort of abandoned that idea for now and was hoping to get if not rest, just not dig myself into a deeper hole at this point, not even halfway through the race. It looked to me like the guy in dark blue ahead of me with the red helmet was starting to lose a little bit of steam. The guy in white overtook him, and I was thinking maybe he had just gone out a bit too hard. So I was hoping that maybe I could stay close behind and pass him when I had a chance, but he ended up with pretty good stamina and stayed ahead of me the rest of the race, I think. I'm not sure where he ended up finishing. Over those barriers again. It's interesting, in Japanese they use the borrowed word chicane for those double barriers. I always think of chicane as more of a sort of an S-curve or maybe a straightaway with sort of a little semicircle jut out that breaks up the straight path. So I'm not really sure why the borrowed term ended up with that meaning. Maybe it's used that way in Europe where cyclocross originated and is so popular. I didn't really have any issues with that up and down, I don't think. And I usually had pretty good speed coming out of it, but I didn't realize how quickly this guy behind me was catching up. Right behind me now. No chance to pass here. But then on this next straightaway, I think is where I started to notice him. So I tried to speed up a little bit to hold him off before dismounting. But something, I don't know what happened here. He spooked me and I just knocked him over. Sorry about that. You can see he's wearing number 63. I think there were only about 63 people registered for the race. 56 people started or finished. So that means he started in the very back of the race. The last row, he must have made up a ton of ground over the first 2 laps. I looked at the lap data, and it looks like he had, I think, the second fastest overall time for maybe the second, third, and fourth laps. At least the third and fourth. And then ended up finishing third. So, very impressive. With my heart rate at 175, it's just so hard to respond to that. So by this point, I was in 6th place, and, you know, I wasn't ready to throw in the towel, but I definitely felt my chances at a top 3 finish slipping away. But I figured I still had enough energy to keep pushing, and maybe I could pick up another spot or 2 if I was lucky, but if nothing else, hopefully hold off anyone else from passing me. And it's tough to decide on the right pace when you're just stuck here on your own. But the one silver lining is you can sort of practice your cornering in these turns and figuring out which lines work best, and just taking the chance to work on some skills. Coming back to the straightaway again, I'm curious to see what my power and speed looked like when I was on my own here with no one immediately in front or behind. So I'm still keeping it up over 300, 350. My threshold is around 300 watts, so it's definitely a hard effort to keep it up there for a minute or 2. But still only 24 kilometers per hour. I think I was up to 27 or so the last couple laps. Heart rate still around 173. Yeah, topping out at 25 kilometers per hour. So it wasn't quite a rest, but at least I didn't dig a deeper hole. Was a lapped rider there. So even though there were 56 people in the race, it was pretty spread out. I think I passed just 2 or 3 lapped riders, and everyone else was just scattered out throughout the whole course. in the top category, you see maybe a couple people bunny hop those barriers, but I don't even practice bunny hops. I'd like to try, but it's kind of hard to set up something I'm comfortable with, and I'm not about to try it in a race. This little crowd up at the top would cheer every time we came through. It's a pretty tame crowd overall. Not like it's ever rowdy, but sometimes it's a little livelier. And coming into the last lap here. Still thought I had decent speed coming through here. I didn't notice anyone behind me, but I also didn't see anyone close up ahead. So again, at this point, I was really just hoping to maintain position. I think this must be another lapped rider up ahead. Didn't recognize him from before.
Ready.
I was really feeling it here with my heart rate creeping up towards 180. But I knew that if I wanted any shot of picking up another spot, or if I wanted to be sure that someone wouldn't come up and catch me, I'd just have to keep pushing for the last 5 minutes. So around here I started to notice someone picking up a little ground behind me. He was still far enough where he didn't seem like a huge threat, but I hadn't noticed him before, so he was obviously a little closer than he had been, and slowly picking up ground. I could see that the guy behind me was starting to get closer. This little stretch here, he was picking up some ground, and then coming into this straightaway, I didn't know how much energy he'd have, so I figured that as long as I kept the speed up, he was going to have to exert a lot of energy to catch up, hopefully that would be too much for him. So I'm up to 28, 29 kilometers per hour, which is as fast as I've been through this section today. Power is consistently over 300, 400, but the heart rate, yeah, just about 180. And I think just around here I just started to fade. I remember feeling in this roundabout here like I just had nothing left. Felt like I was crawling around this turn here, but I could see him right on my heels. And the last few straightaways here were fairly fast, so I really wanted to be able to have some energy to push through here, but I didn't have it in my legs, and he just comes right by me. He was impressive too, number 23. So he started midway through the pack at the start. I looked at lap data, and it looked like he must have gotten stuck behind some sort of bottleneck in the first lap, but then was very fast the next few laps. He was still close enough where I thought there was a chance that I could make up a little ground through these last couple of stretches here. Maybe catch him in that faster section leading into that steep, tight turn before the finish line. And even if I couldn't catch him before that, maybe I could stay close enough where I could just sprint out of it and possibly catch him right at the finish line. Though there's so little room to do that there. But I just didn't have it in me. There was another lapped rider here that I would have had to have gotten around. And I wasn't confident doing that right here with so little room before the incline. So I just resigned myself to not falling here and then slowly rolling over the finish line. So I finished 7th overall, which I can't really complain about too much. One of the top 3 spots would have been great, but the 6 people who finished ahead of me were all really strong riders, so congrats to them. I'll keep working on it and maybe hope to do a little better next time. But congrats to everyone on a great race, and hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.